on the economic opportunities and risk of the metaverse. This theme, and as Ambassador said, the metaverse provides economic opportunities. So we will examine the economic, social, and cultural opportunities for different stakeholders, including governments and the private sector. So I now introduce Mr. Vladimir Radunovic, who is the Director of E-Diplomacy and Cybersecurity Programs of the Diplo Foundation in Geneva. And he will be speaking on unbundling metaverse policy changes. Mr. Radunovic, Vladimir, are you there with us?
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I hope you can hear me. That's the usual greetings. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me. And it's pity I'm not with you somewhere in the Caribbean currently. But first of all, the congratulations definitely for this, to the CTU for initializing this discussion. I've already enjoyed discussing what metaverse is or could be in the first session, and maybe as a small provocation on whether we have one metaverse or more. The question is, would you use a capital M or a small m when you talk about metaverse? Let it stay open. Rodney already got me at the very beginning of his introduction with the suggestion of working from the Caribbean beaches with local people without snow. I come from the part of the world where actually snow was around just a few days ago in Belgrade in Serbia. Not that I don't like snow, but I would like to fly into Caribbean at the very second. I remember I'm of that generation of the Second Life, which was mentioned before, when we in Diplo, we actually had a diplomacy island over there with a museum of diplomacy and the first virtual embassy, or the first, I don't know whether we could have called it metaverse, but let's say a Second Life embassy. It was actually the Maldives, with the beach and sun and sand. So there is something in this environment. Now, I know that this session and particularly the upcoming panel will address a lot of opportunities when it comes to metaverse, and there'll be many discussions about that, what it can bring. But often we don't observe the societal challenges, if you wish. You know, the new technologies, we usually see the problems when they appear. We don't necessarily look ahead. And at the same time, it's the same with digitalization. We usually think about security, privacy, all of these questions once we have done the digitalization. And the policy actually needs to follow innovation hand in hand. Those are the two sides of the same coin. So allow me to play a little bit on the dark side, if you wish, for the next 10, 15 minutes. By no means discouraging innovation and metaverse, but doing it in a way that society and humanity can think in advance of what the impact, the social impact of new technologies could be, so that we approach this innovation in a smart way. Now, why am I cautious? First of all, metaverse, and we already started with that, it is built on a technology which we now know as internet, which is already full of societal problems. Again, it is amazing technology. We've never ever had anything like that in history, but we seem to be missing how we should be using it today, more for the education, less for disinformation and stuff. So we are already building a new technology on the basics of something which is humanity-wise, society-wise, quite on a shaky ground. If we look under the bonnet of the metaverse, if we open the bonnet, what we see is, first of all, the internet, that is existing technology, again, whether it's with small I or capital I. So the internet, where we have the telecommunications as underground, we have the servers and the content and all of that, or protocols, and then we have the social networks as a background. All of them have a lot of open internet governance, digital policy questions, societal questions, which we are still hardly grappling with. But on top of that, and there was a lot of discussion in the previous panel, which I think is the key of this discussion about metaverse, which we usually see, you know, as a 3D world, but it's much more than that, as your previous speaker said. So you have a bunch of technologies which are going to be concepts, which are going to be used there. Augmented reality, virtual reality brings a lot of questions. I'll mention some when it comes to the impact on society and policy questions. Biotechnology with haptic feelings, with neural connections, brain-to-computer interfaces, integrated augmented reality to lenses and so on. artificial intelligence, which will definitely help in automatization of the virtual environments, quantum computing to allow the faster processing power, 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever, satellites for bandwidth, for connectivity, Web 3.0, which was very well mentioned when it comes to crypto assets, decentralized finances, generally decentralized approach. There is a number of questions we have to respond to while we innovate rather than after, and it grows exponentially. And the tech and governments and communities should actually sit down now. And I like what Krish mentioned, the stakeholder capitalism, whatever we put it, but basically working together already to address the challenges that can emerge once we run the technology. So in this part, I want to open this Pandora box of questions and really just scratch the surface, provoke you, if you wish, on some of the questions we'll need to address in the future. And maybe that's a suggestion for the CTU to actually organize a series of discussions on each of those blocks of questions that we disentangle it further. Let's start with infrastructure. So we mentioned the bandwidth and the 6G, 7G, whatever we'll need for that. Standards, there was a lot of discussion about standards already. I think the key question that was raised by Nigel and Rodney before is where these standards are going to be set. Now, there was a comparison with the early days of the internet where actually the standards somehow came up. It was the economic market take up on the standards. Today, we have a huge geopolitical battle around standards. And you can see it if you follow the ITU, ICANN, wherever you move, there's more and more geopolitical pressure. It's not going to be like in the early days of the internet. So I'm not sure we can actually avoid governments being there. I don't know whether we should have them or not, but that's a reality. So this is a really, really important question. The next question is centralized or decentralized. No matter how much we might want to push for decentralized, and obviously not all the companies might want that, there's a huge question of servers and hosting and whether decentralized is actually decentralized, or it's just the up level which is decentralized and actually the infrastructure is still centralized in some servers by some companies. The questions about data localization, sovereignty, the states are increasing demands for sovereignty over data. But the question is, the data is not just personal data. It's also data about the environment. Let's say the virtual apartment that I'm in, the birds that are singing around, whose are the birds? So it's going to be very interesting. Then if you look at development, which is particularly important for the Caribbean, it is not about the VR headsets. Metaverse is, as you discussed, much more than that. And the good question that I want to provoke is whether there is a playing field, whether that playing field has been leveled actually between the developed and developing countries. I'm not so sure necessarily, because the question is, if we, and I come from developing country as well, if we want to be followers and consumers, that's fine. And we are on equal footing. But if we want to be trendsetters and creators, then there is much more that we need to do in order to enable us. And you mentioned education, capacity building, definitely. That's something that we need to have if we want to really have that equal or leveled playing field, right? Let's move to market and economy. One question is of the monopoly and antitrust. Now, we see a lot of problems when it comes to social media and platforms today, antitrust lawsuits around the world. And if Metaverse is going to be built on the same basis, then we might have the same or even bigger problem that we currently have. So that's a big question to ask. Then the regulatory questions in the new era, like how do you regulate and do you? The blockchain, NFTs, from taxes to ownership, money laundering, labor laws. What is labor in virtual world, right? How do you actually add value and so on? Let's move to identity questions. And identity will be the key, I guess. And you mentioned already, the point is that you have your avatar, your identity, which you can shift back and forth through the metaverse components, if you wish. And the NVIDIA CEO mentioned that avatar belongs to you and is you. Now, how do you prove your own identity? Does it mean there will be no anonymity because you will have to register every time you link your real identity with space? That's a huge debate in cyberspace currently. We are going to take it over to metaverse even more. How about the AI? There'll be a lot of AI which is interacting with you in the metaverse. Do we know whether we are speaking to a human? Do we need to use a Turing test and capture codes every time? Can we trust who's behind the avatar, right? Now, who is responsible for misdeeds by the avatar? A company, a person, AI, and so on. Let's move on. Intellectual property. The design is the key in the new world, right? There'll be more and more about the design and intellectual property. So there are a lot of questions about the intellectual property rights, and also about the AI creations. How do we deal with AI creations in that world? Security, and again, scratching the surface. Ransomware, where we have concerns of locking our self-driving cars. Just imagine locking the entire virtual reality where we are actually doing businesses, living, having families, whatever. Altering the reality, and that is the huge question, you know, about deepfake, right? And is when someone artificially changes the video that it looks like someone else is speaking. Now, just imagine in augmented reality or virtual reality world, when someone starts hacking or doing fakes, right, of the identities. And by the way, for those of you that have not watched, you can watch the Hollywood blockbuster, but it's a really good plot, Anon, like Anonymous, Anon. When this happens, just as an idea, right? Then the harassment and violence in the metaverse against the avatars. How do you treat it? What is the legal effect of a violence against an avatar? Is it the same or not? Warfare. I'm not going to even go into that. We have many open questions about how international law applies to cyberspace. What is armed attack? How can a state respond to an armed attack? What is armament? How do we attribute attacks? Now imagine that in metaverse. Well, I hope it's going to end up as a game of shooting instead of shooting in the real world, but that would be good, but I'm not so confident. Then a bunch of questions about human rights, particularly content policy, where content, again, is not going to be just, you know, what you write or a video that you have, but it's also, again, the virtual houses, the birds, the NFTs, the tokens, all of that is content. Now, content policy and control of the people, content moderation, whether as a censorship, political censorship, or towards combating terrorism or crime, is going to be a huge issue. Privacy, similarly, it's not going to be only about our personal data that we used to have. Now we're going to have biometric location data, because location in virtual world is going to be much easier to spot where you are. Everyday habits, if you spend more and more time in this virtual home or whatever, privacy is going to be a huge issue. Safety and health, addiction, psychological effects of being in the virtual world where time flies faster than in reality. And then geopolitics. You already have huge competition between the big parties like the US and China, Metaverse versus Tencent or Meta versus Tencent and so on. Other countries, not least Caribbean, jumping into playing with the Metaverse, like Barbados, first Metaverse embassy, and then we have Seoul and Shanghai in the Metaverse and so on. A lot of questions about governance. So what is the role of the states comparing to the big technology? Will big technology again be dominant and even become bigger than what we have now? Or it can actually change if we get to some sort of a decentralized world? You mentioned governance through code, smart contracts, this difference or interplay between code and the law. Now, who sets the code? It's again the humans, right? Or the AI, which is fed in by the humans. How far can we go towards the governance by code? Do we want it? And Ambassador Babb mentioned that. So that's really a crucial question. And then finally, I think this is a very important part which will become more and more relevant, is the question of humanity. And even philosophy, if you wish. So as we have a digital and human embodiment more together, we'll have questions like ethics, theology, anthropology. How can one be present simultaneously in various spaces? Now, it's already a problem with the Zoom, but it might be less of a problem in Metaverse. Ethical questions about AI, about biotechnology, about connecting our brains together, which will come in 20, 30 years, it doesn't matter. Then what is our real identity as a person? You know, which identity philosophically I have then if I have multiplicity of identities and worlds? And what is the value added to the humanity by each one of us? What is our role if we just sit and create something? And what do we create? A lot of questions. And I'll wrap it up here with I hope I didn't scare too much. There is a risk that someone raised that we might end up in a matrix. We could possibly do so, but I guess we won't. it really depends, as Harari would say, this is one option, but it really depends on whether we start thinking about the society and policy already at the same time while we innovate. And we in Diplo will definitely cover this metaverse and interplay with digital policy more prominently, both with training programs and the Digital Watch Observatory. I'll share the link later on. And I hope for even more interesting cooperation with the CTU in future. I'll shut up now and back to you, and looking forward to great discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Vlada. As always, thanks for that global perspective. I hope you can stick around for a little bit, because very much what you presented is linked to the opportunities. Opportunities sometimes are often overstated. Risk and challenges are real, but I think the opportunities are also real, I must say. And on that note, I really want to thank you for your presentation, and hope you can stick around for the Q&A. But I want Michelle now to introduce the next moderator and the next panel.
So we now proceed to the panel discussion moderated by Dr. Annalee Babb, well-known ICT consultant in the region from Barbados. She will be joined by Mr. Lester Garcia, who is my namesake. He is the head of connectivity policy at Latin America for Meta. We also have Professor Avinash Persaud, who is the chairman of the CARICOM Commission on the Economy. And finally, Mr. Alan Emtage, computer scientist from Barbados. Mr. Emtage is the creator of the first internet search engine. So, our panelists, we welcome you today to our session.
Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Rodney, thank you. Thanks to the CTU for having us all. I think my job today is very simple, because I'm just keeping our wonderful panelists to time, I believe. But before we begin, I'd like to congratulate the government of Barbados in particular and the CTU for this excellent set of presentations and workshop. And if I could just share my screen for one moment. When I was listening to Vladimir, he did a wonderful job of synopsizing all of the different elements and issues that we might want to deal with in respect to this emerging technology and this universe called the metaverse. And I went back to my PhD dissertation, where I talked about a 6-layered access model. And there are issues related to physical access, the infrastructure layer, to financial access, which speaks to equity, to basic access, I call it, which is about the skills, secure access, the safety layer, and policy access. How are we going to regulate all of these different areas? And again, Vladimir gave a wonderful synopsis of the issues involved with that. And then ultimately your content layer, your local innovation, knowledge and content creation. And I think these things are very important. I look forward to the panelists in this session discussing some of these issues, because as I listened to our first session in particular, it came through to me that if the metaverse evolves as we think it might evolve, there are real implications for government, citizens, inclusion, equity, but also issues related to national security. Because what we are essentially doing is creating new worlds. How do governments become involved? How do they manage their citizens and so on? So I look forward to this conversation very much. And I would like to ask our very first panelist, I'd like to begin with Mr. Lester Garcia. And please feel free to go to the Hublio platform and to get the bios of all of our participants and our panelists and so on. So I won't take time to read through, but I just invite Mr. Lester Garcia to begin his own talk or presentation. And please, gentlemen, we'll keep it to 15 minutes, and then we want to leave some time for questions and answers. Lester, please.
Sure. Thank you very much. First of all, thanks to the CTU and the Barbados government for putting this together. I think it's a great event and great opportunity to continue the discussions that have been rising around the globe on this metaverse in just the last few months. However, as you have been discussing, as we know, we've been building this for quite some time, transcending from the current internet to the next generation, to the internet 3.0 or the metaverse or whatever we want to call it. But this new generation of interactions and connectivity that we will face with the metaverse. Let me start by sharing my presentation and try to be as fast as possible, as I know that we have limited time. Can you see my screen? Cool.
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much. So yeah, so let me start. As you know, Meta announced a couple months ago, our CEO and Mark Zuckerberg announced the company focusing now on building this metaverse. And first of all, as I just mentioned a while ago, the metaverse for us is the new internet, new generation of internet. And just as the internet is open, free, and built by all of us, that's what we're envisioning for the metaverse. A discussion like this one, or discussions like this one, where we think, discuss, and present our proposals and our views of what we want this virtual place to be, or this place to be. And I think this will certainly enrich where the way and the place where we will arrive after once this is built, once we get there. So for Meta, the metaverse is connecting these three worlds: the physical world, the world we are in now, of course, with a layer, let's say that way, of further information for our physical world that could be accessible through different devices for individuals, for people. For instance, here, if we see these people traveling through the road, the physical world, of course, is the road per se. Augmented reality would be in their shield screens of their cars and in their cell phones, etc., having this additional information that can be of use for them in their trips. And virtual reality, of course, being in a total different immersive world, however connected and related to the other two. So as I mentioned, our CEO discussed about this and focused the company on having this path towards the metaverse. And what is it for us regarding that particular place? It's a hybrid between social platforms that we see today, but an environment with immersion where people will be able to interact in a more present way, despite the distance and the virtuality. Something that is very important, I think it's part of this discussion as well. It's we are seeing this as a world or a new internet accessible through different computing platforms. Of course, AR, VR devices we were discussing, but also mobile PCs, game consoles, etc. Perhaps we are not seeing yet all the platforms, all the devices that will be available to access the metaverse. So in Meta, we have been working on that, and this is, let's say, our first generation of devices focused on the metaverse, devices and platforms. The Portal is a device for communication. It was actually very much used and demanded during this pandemic situation. It's a small device that gives extra immersion through a camera, an artificial intelligence camera that follows the speaker, and in that regard makes the people in the conversation feel more close. Quest, you all know, is the AR/VR. Quest 2 is actually the new AR/VR device from Meta, and it's our first step into virtual reality. There are already application services being offered through Quest. Spark AR is our augmented reality platform. We are pushing very much creators and people that work through Spark AR to start building the software and the applications of the metaverse and of the new internet. And our newest product, the smart glasses, Ray-Ban Stories, which are offered together with Ray-Ban as a first step in augmented reality glasses or devices. Today is just these glasses can provide taking pictures, taking videos, and connecting with social directly with social platforms, social networks. But this is just the start. And in that regard, just to give you an example, 2 years ago, you needed all of this to use AR/VR, particularly virtual reality. You needed your computer, a couple of cameras, these joysticks or devices to move through, and of course the goggles. Today, sorry, let me go back. Today, as you know, Quest, it's only, oh, I'm sorry. You only need we can see it now. Yeah, sorry. Today, you only need the goggles without any type of wires wirelessly connected to the internet and offering access to these services. And it's not only, of course, Quest 2, but other devices as well. I mean, the technology is evolving and we're getting there pretty fast. And as you know, and you have been discussing, VR is not only about gaming. There are a lot of applications, utilities. As of today, people are training, people are offering university courses, developing applications for health, business, etc., that would reduce costs, that will permit this avoiding paying high trips, etc., for people to be able to interact in business, education, health, and of course, entertainment. So the metaverse is the next generation internet. It's a place where will enable creators to deliver a full, connected, and immersive experience. We're working to get there, and we think these discussions are important to have, as you have been discussing, the rules, the interactions, and of course the discussions that will help us get there in a way where everybody is included and is part of it. What we think it will take, of course, Meta wants to push through developing the technical and connectivity environment of the metaverse, but as well we want to build together with society, with authorities, with other companies, what would be the future would be in the metaverse. We need to develop standards, and here I'm well. Let me go forward. We need to develop standards, of course. We need industry collaboration. It's not just a work of one single company. We need these conversations to have the issues that we need to include and the concerns. Just as we have been discussing, there are a lot of technical, policy, business, social concerns, and of course we need investments. Meta will be investing in the following years $50 million globally just in research to have these discussions and to set this to get to these answers. We will also be creating or we will be financing creator funds to develop these tools and applications. But more than that, we have a policy focus for the metaverse and policy concerns that need to be discussed and need to be settled. We need to get there through these discussions. And the 4 pillars of policy focus area for us are economic opportunity and interoperability. Of course, we need this to work technically, standards, the appropriate technical structures and decisions, safety and integrity, as it has been mentioned before, equity and inclusion, and of course, privacy, which is very much important for the company as it is today. This would be certainly something to pay attention to in the metaverse. But before that, and it's something that I just saw, Dr. Babb, in your scale, that is very important. Actually, you put it as first step. If we want to get there, if we want to build a metaverse, especially for our developing countries, we have to think also on the infrastructure part. We need to build networks that will be capable of delivering this amount of information, this amount of data. And in Meta, and in particular here in the region, we have been discussing very much this through the needed coexistence of 5G networks and Wi-Fi 6 in order to transcend to this, from this physical world to virtual reality and augmented reality. I'm gonna go forward. So for AR/VR devices to be operational and to be physically appropriate for human beings, we need speeds that will help the brain understand that we are in this, that it is in this particular situation and not affect physically with delays and things like that. And these speeds and these technical conditions would only be met through the appropriate technical conditions and the appropriate technical standards. We need low latencies, we need high speeds. In order to get that, the technical conditions, again, the infrastructure and the spectrum conditions are very important for these technologies to develop. So these devices will benefit largely from high bandwidths that will only be available with new technologies. In the case of Wi-Fi 6, the BLP standard, the BLP use case will be necessary for the interaction between this equipment and the current mobile networks, the current mobile services. So even when we are discussing all of these very interesting and important social, political, policy, and business implications of the metaverse, we also need to think in the first steps, which are the technical and connectivity requirements and decisions. In this particular moment, the world is discussing about the 1200 megahertz band, and we have seen a lot of progress on the adoption of 6 gigahertz as a licensed spectrum, particularly in our region, in region 2, all the Americas. This has been a very interesting progress. So I can say the Americas are getting ready for the metaverse, and one very important first step is to having the availability of this spectrum. Here in the CTU have been discussing also about this in the Spectrum Management Task Force. We think it's very relevant to take this into account whenever we are discussing about the metaverse, because in this sense, spectrum would be like the midwife for the metaverse. We need the technical decisions before reaching there, and once we are in the metaverse, we should discuss and we should agree about all other concerns. But for now, we could move to harmonize the 12 megahertz band for unlicensed here in the region and be able to enter the metaverse efficiently and with the technical conditions we require. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lester. Professor Avinash Persaud, we'll go to you next. Avi, you and I go back quite a ways. So it's lovely to see you virtually, if not in person in recent times. Please take the floor and share with us your perspectives, particularly on some of the economic and political opportunities and risk, etc., and in particular for small island developing states. Thanks, Avi.
Thank you very much, Annalee. It's a great pleasure to be on a platform with you. And also I want to thank CTU for being very far-sighted in trying to set this up and establish a dialogue with our people in the region on these new developments. As you said, I'm going to give a economic policy perspective on the opportunities and the risks, as you say, and how governments are, I think, what I might say, progressive governments are thinking about the metaverse and how we engage with it. Let me begin with some uncomfortable thoughts about technology. Now, technology is very important to economic growth. Since the 1850s, where we have good data, technology and technological change has contributed around 1 to 2% growth per year. The very inconvenient truth is that the internet revolution, the computer revolution, has not changed that at all. We have not grown faster because of the internet. We're still plodding along at 1 to 2% growth per year. The internet, however, and technology and the computer revolution and all technological revolutions have been associated with increasing inequality, with changing levels of wealth from one sector to another, and a concentration of wealth. We've seen the creation of a whole set of internet billionaires, and we've not really seen at the bottom level of the economic structure any lifting out of poverty. There's been intensification of inequality. Technology on its own does not improve the conditions of humanity. It's partly how society responds. And one of the goals of government is that we need to respond in a particular way that makes the technological revolution as progressive, as empowering as possible for everybody. That's our task. I think the other thing to say is that that's our starting point when we think about technology. It's an important thing. We need to encourage innovation, but just having it doesn't change society for the better. Sir Arthur Lewis, the region's famous economist, the Nobel laureate, was famous for writing a paper on the unlimited supply of labor. And one of the results of the internet revolution is creating unlimited supplies of labor, which reduces the power of labor. Now, if you're a taxi driver, everyone can compete with you with Uber. Now you are a hotel, everyone can compete with you with Airbnb. So these things are good for consumers. They're not necessarily good for producers. So we need to think about, society needs to think a lot about how we organize these things to make sure that we all benefit. And so one of the things we're observing at the moment is that the world is moving to a tremendous amount of trade and activity occurring on a very small number of digital platforms. Meta is one of them, but so is Google, so is Apple, so is Microsoft. They're probably just a handful, 5 or 6 major digital platforms where a tremendous amount of economic activity is occurring, is trading, is being sold, being purchased. And one of the things that we in government, from a government perspective and a public policy perspective, are concerned about is that these are perhaps the new empires. How do we make sure we don't become the new subjects of these new empires? And I think one way would be if we end up just thinking it's about being a consumer. Netflix is fantastic. We all have great access now. But if all we end up doing is being consumers of this new world, we're going to end up being subjects of a new empire. So the question is, how do we also enable everybody, any person, any citizen, including those from small islands, to become, have as much access to being producers on these major digital platforms? It's one of the reasons, Annalee, as you know, that in the recently fought general election in Barbados, one of our manifesto commitments is something called myeconomy.com. I'm very proud to say I was part of developing that idea. And myeconomy.com is to give every citizen in Barbados a digital account where we will give them a curated set of free tools to allow them to be producers of content on these new digital platforms, because we need to improve that access. So we are, I'd say when we think about the metaverse, we think that this is important. This is an innovation we're watching very closely, and we want to be engaged with it. We want to make sure we're engaged with it to make sure that we can find ways in which our people will have great access to it as not just consumers, but as producers. And that's one of the reasons why we established our embassy in the metaverse. We are doing that with our eyes wide open, being engaged, observing. It's our lookout post on this new economy. It's our lookout post to see what's happening and how can we maximize opportunities for our people as producers and not just consumers. The second key perspective for us is that government, of course, has a lot of, you might say, customers, citizens, people we engage with. And we aren't very good at that. The last mile is often a complication in business, and it is a complication in government. We have a range of things and services we offer people, from welfare to support small businesses, to tax and other things that you engage with government on. And we engage very poorly. We are very expensive in our engagement with people. When we engage with people, they're confused, they don't understand, things fall through the cracks. And so we need to have a much more joined up way of engaging with people. And we think the metaverse and alternative realities may be a tool for that. So we can engage with all of our citizens together at one place in a multivariate way and treat them as a whole person and not as little bits of fragmented people on several different online websites. So that's another reason why we wish to engage with the metaverse. We think there's an opportunity there. We don't know for certain, but we think there's an opportunity there that we can take advantage of. And the final thing I think it's important to say, and I think the last session talked a bit about this, the digital world has also changed geography. You know, one of the interesting results in economic growth analysis is that one is impacted significantly by one's neighbors. So if you're growing up as a country in a bad region, a region with lots of problems, with strife and civil war and those issues, it actually impacts you. If you happen to be in a region that is of great prosperity and growth, it impacts you. Digital allows us to change our geography and to choose our geography. That's amazing. We are, working with the Kenyans on establishing a single regulatory space between Barbados and Kenya. We would never have thought about that before. We would have thought maybe we would do that with Trinidad or Guyana, our neighbors, but not with Kenya. And nothing's stopping us establishing single regulatory spaces with a range of countries where our physical geographies are very different. So we can reinvent our geography. We want CARICOM to be a member of the African Free Trade Union. So we think that we can, and those things weren't really possible before without thinking of this digital space. So those are three reasons why we are looking at this space from an economic policy perspective, with our eyes wide open, wanting to engage, being very conscious that there's a lot of technological excitement. Entrepreneurs should be excited. They always are. We need that zeal. That's what makes them entrepreneurs. But that zeal sometimes gives the appearance that technology is democratizing ownership of capital, is creating an equal world. It's not. It's creating a more concentrated world. And we have to find active ways in which we can leverage the new technologies to empower all of our people and to democratize it. We do believe that there are great opportunities for that to happen, but we just have to do so in an active way. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Avi. Excellent as always. You raised so many issues that I'm looking forward to having the audience ask some questions to tease out a few more issues in terms of what you have shared with us. I'd like now to introduce Mr. Alan Emtage. I don't think, sir, that we have ever had the pleasure to meet, but I've been a fan of yours for many years. So I'm delighted to have you here with us today, and I give the floor to you.
Okay, well, thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be invited to something like this. And I don't have a presentation, but I have several thoughts that I'd like to share with you. The previous presentation, I think, by Mr. Vladimir Radunovic was really an amazing presentation, laying out many of the incredibly complicated issues that will arise in the metaverse. The issues of the living in a virtual reality are far more complicated in some ways than living the real reality, where we have centuries of precedent and infrastructure to build on. This takes us in a whole new direction that we really don't have a good handle on, I think, quite yet. And I will say that one of the things, I came in a little late, so I'm not sure if it was mentioned before, but I would strongly recommend everybody read a novel which is now 20 years old called Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. He was the one who actually invented the term metaverse in the first place. And it's a prescient novel. I mean, it may be a little dated right now because he was writing at the beginning of the popularization of the internet in the early 90s. But it really, he foresaw a lot of these issues, particularly the issues around inequality and equity and people's access into the metaverse, their ability to access the metaverse. I mean, many of us who are somewhat global citizens don't really think about what the challenges even now. I mean, just in Barbados during the pandemic with all the kids, many of the schools online, most of the schools online, that has been a huge challenge just to be able for many children just to be able to see their classes, because of economic challenges and connectivity challenges and so on. And Barbados is a fairly small place, so scale that up to somewhere like India, and you start to see the challenges that are really involved here. One of the things that I would say in relation to the Caribbean is how are our primary sources of income and foreign exchange going to be affected by this new reality? What does tourism look like when the metaverse is involved, for example? Tourism is the driver of economic activity in most of the Caribbean, and it's not clear at the moment what effect that is going to have on our economies. I mean, if you're looking at 50, 60, 70% of your foreign exchange coming from a tourism sector, how is that affected by people being able to visit your country in virtual reality? Right now, you may not be able to feel the sand between your toes or the sun on your face, but if your desire, for example, as many of my friends come down here for, they don't go lie on a beach, but what they do really want to explore is the history of Barbados, for example, right? A long, rich history, 400 years of Western occupation, at least, and they could quite easily visit the museum, St. Nicholas Abbey, the old plantations virtually, and never have to step foot on the island. What income would Barbados see from somebody like that? It's not clear that that will translate into an ongoing income stream if, in fact, tourism continues to remain one of the primary sources of income on the island. And another point from my background, looking at search engines and the history of search engines, we now have a situation where we have one very dominant player in the search engine world, right, which is Google. There are others. There's Bing and DuckDuckGo and a few others, but they're a small percentage of the market. We now have a situation in which, for very valid reasons beyond just proprietary information, Google keeps the algorithms that it uses to render search results incredibly private. And one of the primary reasons they do that is because if it became known how the algorithm works, how they do their ranking, people just manipulate it, right? We have an entire multi-billion-dollar industry in search engine optimization, where people are trying to figure out how best to improve their search results on Google. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate thing, and people are more than welcome to do that. The issue for somebody like Google is when that kind of optimization becomes manipulation. And that is what they are trying to guard against. So people trying to manipulate their search results for their own benefit. It gets more tricky if you consider the possibility of a nefarious motive behind search results. And I'm not ascribing any such motives to Google at this point. I'm just saying that, for example, if in a general election campaign, Google decided that they had a preference for a candidate who showed up higher on the search results, they could, and it has been shown in places like India, where that kind of ranking can have a direct impact on election results. Now, think of what happens in a democracy when, though, that kind of, forget just the regular, what has become garden variety misinformation that is spread on social media platforms. What happens when the so far trusted sources of information ranking, if you want to put it that way, are themselves trying to manipulate the public and in ways that we aren't aware of because there is no transparency. Expand that into the idea of the metaverse. Expand that into somewhere like Barbados, with a population of 290,000 people. It's a very small island, as are most of the Caribbean islands. That kind of manipulation could have a massive impact on any number of social issues and social policies on democracy itself. So I think there are opportunities for sure, but we also have to remember that at any point in time, the metaverse is ultimately grounded in real life, right? The people that are creating it are living real lives. They are interacting with one another, hopefully in real life. And so the opportunities for the Caribbean, I think, are a challenge in the same way that technology innovation is a challenge in the Caribbean, because of the kind of halo effect that you get in places like Silicon Valley, Austin, Texas, New York, Boston, where you have communities in real life that interact with one another to create the technologies and systems that we all use. Many places have tried to replicate that, and it's not as easy as just changing tax policy. It's not as easy as having a nice climate. It's not just as easy as immigration policies. There are special sauces that come about. There's a special set of confluences of events that happen to bring all of the ingredients necessary to have in these environments where technology innovation blossoms and flourishes. And even throughout the developed world, you know, there are many cities that have tried to become the next Silicon Valley, you know, become the next Boston for biotechnology, and haven't succeeded because for various complicated reasons of demographics and climate and tax and all of those kinds of things. I mean, tax policies, how does taxation work in the metaverse, you know, and so on. So I think the challenges to the Caribbean should not be understated. I think there are tremendous challenges, as they are already tremendous challenges for them, for the Caribbean in the technology space. I don't think they're insurmountable, but I don't think we should downplay them, because I think we need to face those challenges head on, and the possibility that our economies could be interestingly disrupted over the next several decades as this new reality becomes a reality.
Thank you so much, Alan. This is excellent. Everybody has kept to time, and so we are ahead of the time curve a little bit. So I'd like to ask Michelle if she could prepare some questions from the audience, but I'd like to kick off because, and it's not just from our session, but particularly some things that Vladimir noted, but from the previous session that we had with Gabriel, Sebastian, and Harish, when they spoke about the technological kind of foundation and some of the other issues involved with this idea of the metaverse. And I wrote this question, and I'd like to pose it to kind of leap off into some audience questions and also some engagement between us back and forth. I wrote some of a country's and a government's key national development and national security responsibilities, in my view, and from my experience, will materially be affected by the evolution of the metaverse if it continues on its present trajectory. For example, if your major public services are delivered through the metaverse and access becomes restricted for whatever reason, remember that, as I understand it, the government is not itself going to own this platform. So where does that leave governments and citizens? And so I'd like to perhaps begin with Avinash, thinking about that, and maybe jump to Alan, and then have Lester come in at the end. What needs to happen to ensure that these types of technologies do not actually destabilize national security, national development, Avi, and in particular, national economic development and national sovereignty as well? I think that's important. I'd like to start with you, Avi, and then I'd like to jump to Alan and then Lester to bring up the rear.
It's a really important issue, Annalee, and I don't think we have a singular answer. Our approach is, and you've heard us say this before, is ownership also matters. So for a long time, the Caribbean development model has been education, sort of riffing off Sir Arthur Lewis's famous comment that the solution to poverty is not money, it is knowledge. But I think we've learned that knowledge itself isn't enough, that ownership also matters. So we have to think about how we can be owners of this new reality. To some of Alan's points, I'm less concerned about tourism, because I believe that this actually will create new additional revenue streams, so people who cannot visit here who will pay for another experience. But we're going to have to actively make sure that we are owners of some of the augmented realities of Barbados, that we participate in that. So I think it's going to be perhaps more diverse income streams than we had before. And in the same way, to your earlier question, I think we have to make sure that we're not dependent on a singular platforms as much as we can. If we can't be ownership, we can't participate as owners. And so that this is additional rather than subtractive, that we have multiple ways of accessing our citizens, of which these platforms are important ways, but not the only ways. And so we have, if you like, built-in redundancy on that. But I think we have to think about how we as small states or developing countries, the global south, can play a greater ownership role. Because otherwise we're just creating 5 new empires like the European empires of the past. And we need to find ways in which we have a different relationship with these new economic empires.
Thank you, Avinash. If I could just ask for Vladimir to also be included in this conversation, if he's still with us, that would be great, because I think he probably also has some good insights to give. So I'll go next to Alan, same question, Lester, and then Vladimir, please.
Yeah, I think one of the key, following on from what Avinash just said, I want to think one of the key issues here is going to be interoperability of the various platforms. Now, I think that's going to probably have to happen as a matter of course, although I say that looking at the Android Apple fight that has been going on for a decade now, more than that, 15 years probably, where they actively try not to interoperate. And that doesn't necessarily bode well for universal interoperability of these platforms going forward. Everybody seems to want to own their own patch and not give it up to anybody else. And as we learned in the old, I'm going to date myself here, but the old VHS Betamax war, only one may live, at the end of the day. So I don't know if that's what we're heading for, or if we're heading for a more cooperative environment. It's hard to say at this point. It's such a new thing. I mean, we have institutions that do this, right? I worked in the IETF for many years, and this is what the IETF does. It fosters interoperability. So we will see where that goes, but that is a key issue, because if you cannot afford to be held hostage by one platform. You must be able to move between platforms easily if you are going to depend on this, any more so than you can depend on having the monopolies of old. If your internet service provider decides to cut you off and they're the only game in town, you're up that proverbial creek, right? So.
Annalee, do you mind if I interrupt and give a little interesting, Alan triggered a thought in my mind, which is that the interoperability can be considered a little bit like the 18th century navigation acts during the European empires. So in the navigation acts, if you were a Spanish island next door to a British island, you couldn't trade with each other. You weren't allowed to navigate their waters. So you had Spanish ports who only traded, the Spanish islands only traded with Spain. They couldn't trade with each other. They couldn't trade the islands next door. And we're in danger of recreating the 21st century version of this unless we can crack some of the interoperability issues.
Thank you both. Lester and then Vladimir. We're talking about governments, national development, national security, national sovereignty, and the impacts, and particularly from where you sit, Lester. This is an important, so we're putting you on the hot seat to have some perspective on how do you manage these mega corporations. I mean, Avi would say, because he's a numbers man, that they're worth more than the GDP of a tiny little island like Barbados. So how do these small island states really play with these massive global companies and the kind of market capitalization that they're also accruing? Please, Lester, and then we'll go to Vladimir.
Sure. So again, I think the metaverse per se is the next generation of the internet, or an upgraded internet, which we have been building together for 20, 25 years, at least in this new stage. In that regard, certainly, I agree. We will be facing the same issues and same concerns as of today. Technically speaking, or market-wise, interoperability, of course, is very important. And I understand the issue between Android, iOS. We can move to computers, devices, etc. And certainly you will have different competitive conditions. However, the internet per se is open, and people can develop their strategies and business cases, etc. That's what we want to build in the metaverse. I mean, it should not be the reign or the property of one and only, or a group of companies. I think everyone should have the opportunity to be there. And in that regard, authorities, government regulators, they have, as we all know, they have been, if I can use the term, learning and practicing for the last 8 years on how to regulate the internet. I'm certain if there, and this is my, as a former regulator, my view is that you need to regulate when there is something to correct in the market, not just regulate for regulating. So if things are not working correctly in the market, certainly regulators are finding the way to cope with that and to make decisions, make regulations that will turn the market in the direction of more efficiency and more fairness, if I may. So I don't. I mean, certainly the challenges are going to be bigger because we are talking about something more massive, much more immersive. Our concerns of today of the internet would certainly potentiate in that sense because of the number of people connected, because of the interactions, because of the amount of data. But I think it's the same issues that we will be facing. It's the scale perhaps that would change, and in that regard, the challenge is there for regulators. But again, regulating a market, being it a digital market or any other market, depends on the effects this market, this economic entities create in the market, not in the desire of the authorities or the government to control a market.
Thank you so much, Vladimir.
Yeah, I guess we need a full 3 days more to discuss these challenges. But building on previous one, I think it is a scale that is a challenge, but it's also pace, and I think that's even bigger challenge. If you look at new generations that are jumping into NFTs and crypto world and decentralized, things are moving so fast that maybe also because it's decentralized, that we are not, even people that are in the field are not managing to get it, let alone people that should be steering it somehow towards economy with all the disruptions you can have in mind. But you have to understand how that works, and let alone the regulators or diplomats and so on, which are generally very slow in this. So I think one thing that we all, particularly us from developing countries, but the whole world, should learn more is what is the exponential function. I think we don't understand it well. But going into details of the, let's say, the Caribbean perspective, maybe developing countries perspective. On one hand, there is the infrastructure that is needed, and I know that is anyhow in the focus of the Caribbean is the infrastructure, the access to the internet. But this goes steps beyond, because you need much better infrastructure, as we discussed, including the servers and the gadgets and all of that. The second one is standards, and a quick reflection on that. There is one of the trends which is showing on a global level is the going towards the open standards, open generally, not just open source, but open standards, open concepts. And I guess the developing countries can actually onboard that and help maybe within different sensation bodies and fora to push for more open standards, because that is what unbundles this dependence and these opportunities for only the big guys. That's which allows you to maybe play with the Lego-like components and create something on your own. And the good thing when it comes to decentralization is that probably the small countries cannot do much. But this is a general global trend and fight between the current big tech giants and the emerging ones, and then the regulatory frameworks in the EU and US and China. So I think in a way it helps, this battle helps developing countries as well, but we have to follow it closely. I'm not going to open the issue of security. I think it's a specific thing that we still can't see, but the only thing we see that as soon as a technology becomes critical for some sort of national security, there is a whole game changer, and you have politicization, you have states jumping into that. You can see that with the IoT, with the AI, and so on. And maybe lastly, and I'm back to something I said at the beginning, was the capacities and skills. To understand and use smartly these technologies rather than running into that. If you take a look at which countries have the first embraced the national cryptocurrencies, it was the Caribbean. Not because it's Caribbean, but it's small countries, right? US, China, EU haven't rushed into that. They spend a lot of time in analyzing what it brings, because they have capacities. They have, people that can basically deal with that. So I think one bit that we in developing countries should think about, and that's maybe an input to the next discussion on skills, is that when we train kids and young generations into dealing with new technologies, that we have to help them also understand the society and the impacts of the society. So that means not just the skills, but making them responsible citizens in this new, whatever, Web 3.0 world, where they would understand also the privacy, security, economic aspects and all that while developing that world.
Thank you. That's a fantastic response. I'd like not to overstep into the next session, but that skills issue is a very important one, and I look forward to hearing what they have to say on that issue. If I could ask the CTU and Michelle, are there any questions from the audience that you might help us to field now?
Yes, Dr. Babb, we have many questions lined up for our panelists. And this one is from our Facebook live streaming platform from Sergio Mark. He's asking, seeing that the metaverse seems to have some ties with cryptocurrency, would there be some formal adoption? Would there be some formal adoption of cryptocurrency within formal financial sectors? And that question to...
That sounds like a question for Professor Avinash Persaud.
Yes, definitely.
The cryptocurrency investors, we come to us a lot. I mean, one of the challenges of being a small state is we attract a lot of entrepreneurs of things that are both good and perhaps on the edge, between the cracks, and some of these crypto investors are being pushed away from other places. And so we have to be very careful to make sure we do the right thing. And our philosophy so far, I think, across the region has been, it's not clear to us why cryptocurrencies need separate regulation. The essence of regulation is protecting consumers and protecting the financial system. So the way we regulate a volatile security is by making sure that we don't expose the vulnerable consumers too much to it until it becomes more stable, perhaps. Most of the crypto investors really want regulation which allows them to be exempt from all regulation. And so far we've been resisting that. And I think with good reason. I think I would say one broader picture though, which is that there needs to be there are a lot of important powers in the digital world. They are, because of the power of because network economics encourages bigness. One of the things that Meta wants to do legitimately, and Google wants to do, and keeping its algorithms secret and all, is kind of create big networks, and that gives them tremendous economic power. And we've been there before. This is monopoly power or oligopoly power, and we do need to think, who's the countervailing force? Is it going to be people? Is it going to be producers? I don't think they can be the countervailing force. So governments do need to play an important role, not to discourage the innovation. We need to somehow get that balance right between innovation, but also making sure that power is not abused and people have access. From a small state point of view, we can do two things. We can agitate for global policy response, and at the local level, we can do a lot to make sure that our people can be producers and not just consumers on these platforms.
Thanks, Avi. Alan, Vladimir, Lester, any responses to that question from the audience?
This is not my bailiwick, so I'll stay out of that one.
Vladimir, any perspectives?
Just maybe a quick one that what Avinash mentioned is that there will be global fora that will be discussing these things in one way or another. And unfortunately, again, because of the lack of capacities that small states have, including in diplomatic circles. If you look at the missions that small countries have in Geneva or New York or somewhere else, it's really a couple of people, and very few of them can actually understand this. We need to make sure that we are able to follow, and that's my dog barking, that we are able to follow the discussions in, WTO or ITO, wherever things happen. And I think it has to be top on the agenda.
See, but this becomes, I think, a very, very important issue. And Avinash, because of your position within CARICOM, but also in government, if you go back to the model that I shared, that's almost 18 years or more ago that I developed that. And I think our small island states have gotten worse, Vladimir, at covering these issues because they require resources, money, people to cover and to report back, and systems and structures and so on. So again, I come back to the point that Avi began with. He said, we think that technology is this wonderful equalizer. It's not. And as it continues to evolve, it's getting more and more challenging for small island states in particular to manage. So I put it out to us as a group. Do we have solutions with respect to how the Caribbean, and maybe I should put, although he's not a part of this panel, maybe I should put the Secretary General of the CTU on the hot seat and ask him in this context, what are the CTU's plans for helping the Caribbean as a region? And I assume he would work very closely with Professor Persaud in his regional position within CARICOM on that economic council. But what's the plan? Do we have one, or are these conversations supposed to help us begin to map out that plan or strategy?
Thanks for putting me on the spot. Of course, we do work closely with the CARICOM Commission on the Economy, of which Professor Persaud is chair. And in fact, there are a number of recommendations along developing the digital economy that have come out of that commission, including the promotion of the single ICT space, and in particular elimination of roaming to help drive the uptake of data services and so on. So we definitely work closely in that respect. And certainly we called on him for this reason to be a part of this panel, because we certainly believe that even this, in terms of building awareness, is part of is a piece of the puzzle. So how do we get entrepreneurs and innovators excited about the new possibilities? And I spoke about government interventions. Yes, that is one thing, but you also need the uptake of citizens, and you also need the capacity of the private sector to be able to provide some solutions. And one of the things actually that Professor Persaud said about growing inequalities, in particular tourism, he mentioned I think it was Uber, or someone mentioned Uber, but what I wanted to challenge him on is, in particular, for these platforms that are providing platforms for the sharing economy. Certainly, an old lady in St. Lucie with her 2-bedroom house can participate within this, digital economy by, accessing Airbnb, Flipkey, and all these other platforms that she did not have access to before. So certainly, it provides an avenue for leveling the playing field with the big hotel sectors and so on. In fact, there was some degree of pushback for these services by the hotel sector at some point. And same for the Airbnb, the ride-sharing platform, because I could, after hours take my vehicle and you know, make a few extra bucks. So in a sense, is that not also part of the leveling of the playing field and providing opportunities for the disenfranchised, those who are not connected necessarily or through, you know, can't afford a permit, a high cost and so on to participate within this growing digital economy?
Yeah, well, I just want to make a comment before I ask Vladimir. He has his hand up, so he wants to make a comment on this. But you remember the whole notion of creative destruction, Rodney, because the entities that will be affected by ride sharing and those things and are small taximen and others who make the living. So how do we manage, and this is probably Avinash's bailiwick as well, but the creative destruction that technology introduces into economies as we grow in cycles. Vladimir, please.
Yeah, a quick comment, not that much on creative disruption, but rather on this representation, participation of the small countries. You mentioned that it's also the matter of money and people and resources, but there are ways around that. First of all, it has to become a strategic political priority. And you can see that in digital policies as well. As long as digital policies are not, but just digitalization without the policy is not a priority of the higher level of governments, it's not there. It's not on the agenda. So it has to become a clear understanding of the high level people in the governments that this is the next step. You need to think about digital. Everything is digital. It's, you know, there is no more cyberspace. This is the real world. It will become the same with the metaverse at some point. So it's strategic priority. And the second one is working together to let's say, optimize the resources. On one hand, certainly, I'm sure the Caribbean states, not least to the CTU, work together also in the New York, in Geneva, wherever things happen, and that has to be reinforced. But there is another bit, which is that representation today is not just for the governments. Well, obviously, when decisions are being brought, yes. But in many, many cases, it's actually about being in the dialogue, contributing to the dialogue. And guess what? You have an amazing number of people, and I'm sure you all know them, which are not part of the government, but they are somewhere in ICANN, and even in ITU, in various business communities. You have your representatives everywhere around. Start with mapping them, whom you have, where they are, what they can do. They're all, I'm sure, very big patriots. They will help. So try to get all the resources you have, all hands on deck, you know, if you wish, of the Caribbean people in different institutions and for around the world. The IGF, the, you know, IEEE and so on. And that's my advice always when doing the trainings for small countries for diplomats. Start working with other NGOs, with the NGOs, with businesses. You have to work on this together.
Thank you so much. Michelle, other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Babb. You know, Professor Avinash, you mentioned that we need to make the tech revolution as progressive and powerful for all. I would like to add, inclusive for all. So this next question comes from Mrs. Natila, who asks, how do we get the older generation involved in the new reality of the metaverse and all that it offers? Is there a concern of leaving them behind and widening the gap already created by the online world, accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you. I will begin with perhaps the youngest among us. Alan, can you give us a perspective, because you were there at the beginning of this whole search engine idea, and so on. You've seen the progressions of things and so on. So not that I'm putting you on the spot, but how do you get older people? I'm assuming you're speaking perhaps about people who are older than any of us in this discussion right now. But how do you get them involved and ensure inclusion across the board? Alan, would you begin? And then I'd love to hear from Lester as well, and then from Vladimir.
You too. There we go. Well, I'm flattered that you might think I'm the youngest person here. I'm not sure that's true actually, but we'll move on from there. That's a real challenge. I mean, that's not to make a joke about it, but it's a real challenge. I have several elderly relatives that I keep an eye on in various ways. And I will tell you that, you know, it's a conversation that I have amongst my friends quite often, and have been having quite even more so recently with exactly this topic, you know, NFTs and the metaverse and all of these new technologies, and saying to them, you know, are we going to be what our parents are to the existing technology for the new technology? You know, is it going to be as challenging and as confusing to us as the existing technology is to the generation above me? And I think that's, you know, that also depends on user interfaces, right? I mean, a lot of these issues go away if you have good intuitive user interfaces. That also requires money. That also often requires expensive equipment or hardware or something to you know, the virtual reality world is not going to work if you get something that works at 3 frames a second, right? It doesn't work unless you have the capacity to truly interact with it, and at the best level. And so I think this is really a challenge of design and access, but creating interfaces into this new world that allow people to do so in ways that are familiar to their existing life. You know,
Yeah.
if you step into virtual reality and you can have a conversation with somebody and you can interact with the technology, be it AI or a real person, in a way that's familiar to you, that will go a long way. The difficulty with the older generation is largely about complicated, often unnecessarily complicated interactions with the technology, because they are being built by young people who understand them. And I mean, even myself, I'm a technologist. I've been working on the internet for 40 years, and I marvel at some of the true dumpster fire user interfaces that I see coming out of even major corporations. And I think, you guys, how are you doing this? How did this ever get out? When because it becomes insular, right? Because it becomes a small group of developers and a small group of designers, and it becomes somewhat incestuous, and they think that what they're designing is understandable to the rest of the world, and it's not. And so that's my only solution to it, really, is to
and Alan, that is an excellent response. I think that we have run out of time. I think that we only have about 1 more minute. So I unfortunately, Rodney, you need to do this again and let us focus on some of these key areas to just have a whole session on. But I think that's a wonderful point to end on from Mr. Alan Emtage. That interfaces, user interfaces design. I will never forget, my mother is elderly, and she had a real challenge, and still does, working on a computer keyboard, typing and so on, because it happened. So I remember when they first came out, I got her a gift of an iPad. And when I showed her, you can just point, and she says, "Oh, I want one of those." And I actually had to ban her from the Apple bookstore, because she just went on and she was able to buy her books and do things. So this notion is about inclusion, Alan, and everyone else. And if the people who are designing these technologies do not reflect the world, then you're going to have a lack of access. I think that's a wonderful note on which to end. I would like to thank all of you for an excellent discussion. Rodney and Michelle, we look forward to the CTU inviting us back to perhaps choose 1 or 2 of these topics and drill down a little deeper. Thank you all so much for most engaging conversation. Back to you at the CTU. Thank you.
Thank you.